A white teacher pointed at a quiet black boy in class and snapped, "Sit down, you are not smart enough to speak." But what she did not know was that the boy she humiliated would soon stand on the national stage, defeat the nation's best debaters, and expose her cruelty to the entire world. What started as silence became a speech that shook America. Watch till the end, you untold believe who calls him from the Supreme Court. He slammed her palm against the desk so loud, even the hallway outside fell silent. Sit down. Elijah, you are not smart enough to answer that. That was the first time I felt that heat of shame creeping up my neck, like fire ants crawling under my skin, as 34 other students stared at me, half in shock, the other half in cruel delight, as Catherine Wallace, the social studies teacher, white, stern, blazer always pressed, hair tied in a bun so tight her frown seemed permanent, looked me straight in the eyes like I was dirt. All I had done was raise my hand. I was not even going to speak loudly. I was just trying to ask if I could explain my interpretation of the Constitution's First Amendment. We were doing a class discussion, supposedly. But the moment I opened my mouth, she cut me off. "You," quoting the Constitution. Please, that is a stretch. The words echoed in my ears. My heart pounded so loud, I thought it would crack my ribs. I looked down, ashamed. My fingers clenched around my old textbook. Its corners were frayed, pages yellowed from years of use. Someone in the back laughed. "Bet he can't even spell Constitution," muttered Jared Harper, son of our school board director. The laughter grew louder, as Wallace did not stop them. She smirked. "All right, class, let us get back to hearing from students who actually study." I wanted to disappear. But the worst part was not the humiliation. It was the way she looked at me, like she knew I would not fight back. Like I was used to it. Like I was exactly the boy she believed. I was a poor black kid with hand-me-down clothes and a voice too soft to matter. I sat down, not because I believed her, but because that was how I would survive all my life. Stay quiet. Don T cause waves. Keep your head down and you won, not get in trouble. But that day, something cracked inside me. That day, I began to question what silence had ever bought me besides more silence. Let me back up. My name is Elijah Brown. I am 16 years old. I live in the south side of Atlanta with my grandma, Miss Bernadine. She has raised me since I was 6, after my mama passed from lupus. I do not have a dad, never met him. Every day, I walk 3 miles to Booker T. Washington High. The school sold, underfunded, and ignored. Our debate team has not won a competition in over a decade. Our textbooks are older than I am, but it is home. And me, I have always been the quiet one, not stupid quiet. There is a difference. See, I love reading. Law books, history, philosophy, anything that tells me how people think, how justice works. My favorite book, The Souls of Black Folk by Webb. Du Bois. I read it cover to cover at 12, but none of that mattered to Ems. Wallace. To her, I was just another invisible kid with skin too dark to be heard. After class ended that day, I stayed behind. My palms were still sweaty. She did not look up from her grading sheet. I gathered my courage as Wallace. I did not mean to interrupt. I just wanted to. She sighed. Loud. Elijah. Look, I have taught here for 20 years. I know which students can make it. You are not one of them. Don't waste my time or yours. Her words were knives. She stood, adjusted her pearl necklace, and looked me dead in the eye. If you want to be heard so badly, go practice in the mirror, but do not do it in my classroom. I left without saying a word. That night, I did not eat. I just sat in our cramped living room, listening to Grandma humming gospel tunes in the kitchen, her hands kneading dough for Sunday's bread. The walls were thin. The windows let in more wind than light. But in the corner stood a bookshelf. My shelf, full of books I would collected from donation bins, libraries that closed down, and once one a lawyer gave me at a bus stop when he saw me reading a Supreme Court decision printout. I took out Brown v. Board of Education, and I started reading out loud to no one but myself. Because, as Wallace said, I was not smart enough, and something in me wanted to prove, not just to her but to the world, that my voice mattered. The next morning, I did not sit in the back. I chose the front row. And when she asked a question, I raised my hand again. She did not call on me, but I kept doing it. Every day, until I became invisible in a different way, unignorable. It was not loud. It was not flashy. But it was the beginning of a war. Quiet boy with nothing but borrowed books and a voice no one thought was worth hearing was about to become the loudest voice in the room, and none of them saw it coming. Not Mez, Wallace, not the principal, not the entire nation, but they would. They all would. People never expect much from quiet boys. They think silence means weakness, that shyness equals stupidity, that softness is the absence of strength. But I have learned something about the world. It is not the loudest who shape it, but the ones who choose their moments, the ones who listen, the ones who wait. I was just a quiet boy, but I had a storm growing inside. My name is Elijah Brown. 16. Black. Southern. Poor. But if you think that is all there is to me, then you are exactly like the world I was born into. I lived with my grandmother, Miss Bernadine, in a rust-colored apartment block 2 miles south of the old Atlanta train station. The neighborhood had long since been forgotten by promises and politics. The paint on the buildings peeled like old scabs. Sirens screamed more often than birds sang on cold nights. The walls whispered with wind, and the roaches knocked louder than visitors. We did not have much. Some weeks, not even enough to keep the lights on the whole month. But my grandma made sure we had something more valuable than comfort. Dignity. She was a small woman, shoulders hunched from decades of cleaning houses that would never belong to her. Her hands were rough, palms calloused from work, but her eyes were fire-fierce and unyielding. Elijah, she would say every morning, pouring me the last drop of milk like it was a royal offering. You got God's fire in you, baby. Don't let no one douse it with their lies. I would smile, nod, and pack my beat-up backpack, zippers barely working, patches holding it together like faith. Then I would walk past the bus stop filled with kids from the charter school, past the corner where old men played dominoes on milk crates, past the liquor store where they sold dollar ramen and gospel CDs, past it all until I reached the iron gates of Booker T. Washington High School. My school was more prison than palace. Barred windows, flickering lights, metal detectors at every entrance, a cracked basketball court where dreams bounced harder than the ball. And inside, teachers so tired they barely looked up from their desks, and students so hurt they only knew how to speak in fists and sarcasm. Except me. I was different. Not because I was better, but because I believed in books. Books were the only voices that did not shout at me or ignore me. They spoke truth. Unfiltered, eternal, sometimes painful, but always honest. I spent every lunch in the library, tucked in the farthest corner. I would read cases from the Supreme Court. I knew the rulings in Plessy v. Ferguson, Roe v. Wade, Miranda v. Arizona, and of course Brown v. Board of Education, the case that ironically shared my name. Sometimes, I would whisper the arguments out loud, mimicking the rhythm of a real lawyer. I would imagine myself in front of a courtroom, or at least in front of a class that listened. I had no audience, only dust and paper, but still, I rehearsed like it mattered, because it did. To me, I wanted to be heard, not because I needed applause, but because I had things to say, things about fairness, about truth, about the way the world silences kids like me, just because we do not wear new shoes or speak like TV anchors. But the world does not hand microphones to kids like me. They hand us detention slips and excuses. I remember one afternoon, I found a torn flyer stuck under a chair in the library. It read, "Do you have a voice? Prove it. Atlanta Youth Debate Qualifier. Individual entries welcome." I held the paper like it was the golden ticket. My heart skipped. Could I really enter? Then I remembered as Wallace. Her voice still echoed in my mind. "You," quoting the Constitution. "Please." I almost tore the flyer. Almost. But something stopped me. It was not rage or pride. It was the memory of my mom. Her name was Nami. She used to read to me every night, even while the sickness drained her bones. Her favorite quote was from Frederick Douglass. "If there is no struggle, there is no progress." She made me recite it every morning before school. When she died, I stopped saying it out loud. Until that moment, I whispered it again. If there is no struggle. Then I folded the flyer and put it in my backpack. That night, I waited until Grandma fell asleep. Then I tiptoed to the bookshelf, pulled down the Constitution annotated, and started reading aloud again. I read every clause, every amendment. And then I did something I would never dare to do before. I wrote a speech. It was not pretty. It had scribbles, crossed out words, and grammar mistakes. But it was mine. It was about the power of speech, and the injustice of assuming silence equals stupidity. I rehearsed it in the mirror for hours. Practiced inflections, pauses, looked myself in the eye like I was arguing with someone who did not believe in me. Because, in a way, I was. The next morning, I skipped breakfast and headed to the downtown library. I asked the front desk librarian if she knew anything about debate. She gave me a blank look. but the man behind her stepped forward. "You looking to compete, son?" he asked. He had gray hair, glasses too big for his face, and a cane with a carved eagle head. I nodded, too nervous to speak. He extended his hand. "Donald Ray. Used to coach college debate back in the 80s. Mind if I take a look at that speech? That is how I met my first mentor. Ray did not laugh at my paper. He read it quietly. Then he said, "You got something here, raw, but real. But if you want to win, we are going to need to sharpen that blade." And we did. Every day after school, I would go to the library. We would study structure, rhetoric, counterpoints. He taught me how to pace, how to breathe, how to land my words like bricks, not feathers. And for the first time, I felt it power, not the kind that shouts or bullies, but the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to apologize for it. I was still quiet, still shy, still unsure, but I was not invisible anymore. And I was not alone, because one quiet boy, armed with truth and guided by purpose, is a force louder than any scream, especially when he learns how to speak. And I was learning, fast, faster than anyone could imagine. Especially Wallace, because while she was busy trying to silence me, I was building the voice that would one day echo through the halls she thought belonged to her. And I was just getting started. They say schools are where dreams begin, but in my school, they were more likely to end. Booker T. Washington High was built in 1964, back when they still had to pretend segregation did not exist. The bricks were crumbling, the ceiling tiles sagging like tired eyes. The computers were older than most teachers. But what truly failed us was not the building. It was the system. The invisible blueprint that told certain students they mattered. And others, like me, to stay in our place. Let me explain. As Catherine Wallace was not just a teacher. She was the unofficial queen of that school. Everyone knew her word was final. She ran the curriculum, sat on the scholarship committee, chose who got to speak at graduation, and, most importantly, she picked the students who would be on the debate team. Every fall, they held tryouts. But do not be fooled. It was not about skill. It was about legacy. Who your parents were, who donated to the school, who wore clean shoes and spoke without a southern drawl. And that is how Trent Kingsley, the rich, cocky son of Principal Kingsley, became debate team captain. Trent was 17, white, and had teeth so white you would think he flossed with cash. He wore collared shirts every day, and his dad gave him a new car for his birthday, parked right outside, while some of us could not even afford bus fare. He did not win debates. He won approval. I still remember the day the team list got posted. It was early morning. The hallway still quiet except for the janitor's mop swiping across the tiles. I walked up to the bulletin board, already knowing what I would not see, but I looked anyway. Selected debate team members: Trent Kingsley, Samantha Bloom, Jared Harper, Alexa Moore, no Elijah Brown. Even though I had submitted my application weeks early, even though I had a 4G PA, even though I had won the Atlanta Public Library Youth writing contest 2 years in a row. I did not even get a rejection letter. Just silence. Like I never existed. I stood there staring, feeling the weight of something I could not name. It was not just rejection, it was erasure. Then Jared walked by, smirked, and muttered, "Told you they do not take charity cases." Later that day, during lunch, I sat alone like usual, but that afternoon, as Wallace called me into her classroom, she did not look up when I entered, just kept scribbling on some papers with her red pen. "Elijah," she finally said, "you have potential." I blinked. Was this an apology? But debate requires more than books. It is about presence, poise. You lack those things. And just like that, the door slammed shut on my hopes. I tried to argue. I could improve. "I have been practicing." She raised her hand. "It is not personal. It is preparation. We need people who can win." I stood there, heart in my throat. "I can win," I whispered. She laughed short, sharp, cruel. "This is not a library contest. Elijah, these judges expect polish. Confidence, not whatever you bring." Then she turned back to her papers. Already done with me. I left with my fists clenched and my eyes burning. That night, I told Grandma. She was sitting in her rocking chair, knitting a scarf for a baby down the hall. Her hands paused when she saw my face. "They did not choose you?" she asked gently. I shook my head. She nodded slowly, then leaned forward. "Elijah, baby, the world does not run on fairness. It runs on power. And power do not like truth unless it wears a pretty suit." I did not understand it then, but I felt it, deep. I looked at our chipped wallpaper, the photo of my mom smiling beside her old graduation cap. She never got to use her law degree. She died with dreams folded under hospital bills. And here I was, rejected before I even spoke. But then something shifted. Not in the world, in me. The next morning, I went back to the bulletin board, stared at those names. Then I took out my notebook and wrote at the bottom of the list, "I will see you on the stage." I did not need their permission. Donald Ray believed in me, and he was not the only one. At the library that afternoon, I found an envelope waiting for me. Inside was a worn copy of Supreme Court oral arguments, Vol. I, and a note. "We sharpen our tongues not to hurt, but to heal. Debate well. Elijah, Dar." I held the book like it was armor, because that is what I needed to build. Protection, not from bullets, but from the kind of violence that wears a smile and says, "You are just not what we are looking for." From that day forward, I trained harder. I recorded myself, timed my speeches, memorized precedents. I read about Thurgood Marshall, learned how he used logic to dismantle segregation in courtrooms full of white men who did not want to listen. He did not shout. He did not beg. He outthought them. That was going to be me. And then something happened I did not expect. The Atlanta Youth Debate Qualifier, the one I found the flyer for, released their registration list. And there it was. Name: Elijah Brown. School: independent entry. I was in. No coach. No teammates. No school backing me, just my voice, and a speech I had written in the margins of rejection. The system was not built for me, but I was not going to wait for it to change. I was going to break into it anyway. They did not hear me when I spoke in class. They did not see me when I raised my hand. But they would hear me soon, because I had chosen my weapon, and it was not fists. It was words. After registering for the Atlanta Youth Debate Qualifier, something inside me changed. Not fast, not loud, but steady like a pot starting to boil. Every day after school, while Trent Kingsley and the debate team practiced in the fancy new media room, I walked 3 blocks to the downtown library and met Donald Ray in the quiet basement archive, where the dust curled in sunbeams like forgotten dreams. Ray was a different kind of teacher. He never raised his voice. He never looked at my clothes. He looked at me, and he taught me not with scolding, but with patience and an occasional raised eyebrow. "You have got fire, Elijah," he said, tapping the desk as I fumbled my opening argument. "But fire without direction just burns. Let us aim it." We trained 5 days a week, sometimes 7. Structure, cadence, opening statements, rebuttals. "How do you define justice, Brown?" he would ask, and I would answer again, again until my words were bullets and my pauses were power. I did not tell anyone at school, not Mez, Wallace, not even my classmates. Let them laugh. Let them call me the mute kid in the back. I was gathering proof. At night, in our dim living room, I would stand in front of the mirror and rehearse. My grandma would sit silently, crocheting scarves for the church, listening as I argued against invisible judges. Sometimes she would hum softly while I spoke, gospel tunes, as if to remind me, "Keep your soul in your words, baby. That is what gives them weight." I recorded everything on my old phone. Playback, adjust, reword. I would learn not to run from my southern accent, but to lean into it, own it. Because my voice carried the history of my people, and I would not be ashamed of that. One night, I printed out photos of every Supreme Court justice in American history and pinned them to my wall. Black and white portraits stared back at me. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Thurgood Marshall, John Marshall, Clarence Thomas. I lit a candle and whispered, "One day, you will know my name too." But as I rose, so did the resistance. 2 days before the qualifier, as Wallace called me into her classroom again. She wore her usual navy blazer, her lipstick blood red. She folded her arms and looked me over like a bug on a windshield. "I heard you entered the youth debate qualifier," she said flatly. I did not answer. She stepped closer, without school authorization. "I do not need permission," I said quietly. "It is an open tournament." Her smile was ice. "Elijah, you are a good student, but you are setting yourself up for public embarrassment. Debate is not about reading books in the library. It is about poise, stage presence, pressure." I met her eyes for the first time. "Good," I said, "because pressure makes diamonds." She blinked. Her smile vanished. For the first time, I saw it, a flicker of something like fear. She did not see a poor, quiet boy anymore. She saw a threat. When I walked out, my hands were shaking, but I smiled. Because that is when I knew I was in the fight now. That evening, Trent and Jared cornered me outside the school gates. "Hey, Martin Luther King Jr." Jared sneered. "Gonna change the world with your little book reports." I did not stop walking. Trent blocked my path. "You seriously think you can win?" "No," I said calmly. "I know I can." He laughed. "You will choke. You do not belong up there." That word again. Belong. Like they had keys to every room. Like the system was theirs to grant or deny. I stepped forward, just enough to make him move. "I do not need to belong," I said. "I just need one chance. And when I get on that stage, you will wish you had listened." I walked past them. Didn't he look back? Didn't he need to? Because I had something they did not. Purpose. And when purpose is louder than fear, you become unstoppable. That night, I stayed up until 3 rewriting my closing argument. My grandma brewed tea and handed me a blanket. She did not say anything until I finally looked up. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded. "They will try to make me small, but I am going to show them the size of my truth." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "Then go shake the world, baby." The next morning, I dressed in my cleanest clothes. Not a suit, just a pressed shirt. No watch, no tie, just a notebook, a heart full of truth, and a voice I would sharpen in silence. The qualifier was held at the downtown Civic Center. Polished floors, white walls, judges in crisp suits, clipboard in hand. I sat in the waiting room, alone. Other schools came in teams. They wore blazers, ties. Their coaches gave last-minute pep talks. No one looked at me until they called my name. Elijah Brown. "Room 3. You are up." I stood, breathed in, walked down the hall. My heart beat like thunder. My hands shook, but my steps were steady, because this was it, no turning back. The quiet rebellion had begun, and when I opened my mouth in that room, they would all hear me. The door creaked shut behind me. I was alone, alone in room 3, alone in front of 3 judges seated at a long table, their eyes neutral. Pens ready. A digital timer sat on the edge, already blinking. 10 minutes. That is all I had. 10 minutes to prove I was more than the color of my skin, more than the neighborhood I came from, more than a statistic buried in an underfunded zip code. 10 minutes to make them see me. I stepped to the podium. My palms were damp, my throat dry. The paper in my hand shook. One judge, a middle-aged woman with short silver hair, gave a polite nod. "You may begin when ready, Ma. Brown." I looked down. The first line of my opening statement stared back at me. The Constitution was not written for boys like me, but I have read it anyway. I did not read it. I said it loud, clear, and just like that, the room changed. Something shifted in the air, not in them, but in me, because I had said it, I had started. And once I began, there was no stopping. I spoke about Brown v. Board of Education, about separate but equal never being equal. I told them how silence had been a shield for me, how books had been my only allies. I quoted Justice Marshall and Ginsburg. I used cases they never expected a kid like me to know. I did not beg for sympathy. I offered facts. I did not whine. I reasoned. And when I reached my final paragraph, I locked eyes with every judge in that room and said, "We do not need new laws. We need new listeners. And if no one will give us the mic, we will build our own stage." Silence. Not awkward. Not dismissive. Reverent. The silver-haired judge leaned forward. "Thank you, Ma. Brown." I nodded. Stepped back and walked out before my knees gave out. I collapsed onto the hallway bench. My chest heaved. My heart raced. I had done it. I did not know if I would won, but I knew I had spoken every word I had carried in my chest for years. A tap on my shoulder. I looked up to see a girl, maybe 17, white. Auburn curls, clipboard in hand. She was in the last round. I remembered her face. "You wrote that?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, unsure. "That was incredible," she whispered. "Hope I am not up against you." Then she smiled and walked away. And in that moment, I realized something. I was not invisible anymore. Later that afternoon, the winners were posted on the digital screen in the auditorium. Dozens of names scrolled. Some cheered. Others sighed. Coaches patted backs, took group photos. I stood in the back, alone, still in my pressed shirt, backpack on one shoulder, notebook clutched like a lifeline. Then the screen blinked. Top finalist, Elijah Brown, independent entry. I froze, stared. My name, in bold. First, cheers erupted from some students. And from the back of the room, I heard a voice louder than all others. "Oh Lord, praise Jesus, that is my grandbaby." Grandma, she had come. Somehow, she had found the bus, made the trip, walked into the Civic Center with her old Sunday hat and her church shoes that squeaked with every step. She rushed toward me, arms open, eyes full of tears, buried my face in her shoulder, felt her tremble. "You did it," she whispered. "You did it." I wanted to cry, but I did not. Not yet. There was more coming. Reporters from local news came up, asking for photos. A man with a notepad asked me, "What school do you represent?" I looked him straight in the eyes. "I represent me." That evening, the local news ran a segment titled, "Silent No More. Local Teen Wins Debate Championship as Independent." At school the next morning, everyone had seen it. I walked in through the main hallway. Normally, I would move fast, head down, to avoid the usual laughter or comments. But that day, the hallway parted like the Red Sea. Students stared, whispered. Some clapped. Even the janitor gave me a thumbs up. And at the end of the hallway, leaning against the wall like nothing had changed, Trent Kingsley and Jared Harper. Trent looked me over, smirked. One lucky speech. I did not flinch. Then I will keep getting lucky. Jared scoffed, but this time, he said nothing else. Power did not just shift. It cracked. And Wallace. She said nothing. Didn't he even look at me during class? But I saw her fingers tremble when I walked past her desk. At lunch, something even stranger happened. A freshman, a small boy. Glasses, braces sat beside me. He did not say a word for 5 minutes, just stared at his tray. Then he whispered, "I want to learn how to do what you did." I blinked. He looked up. "I want to speak, but I do not think they would ever let someone like me." I looked at him. Really looked, and I saw myself 3 years ago. Quiet, scared, full of words but no stage. So I nodded. "I will help you, because the first spark is not meant to stay alone. It is meant to start a fire, and the fire had just begun. I thought the hard part was over. I thought that once I stood on a stage and proved myself, the world would open its doors. I was wrong. Because when you rise from where they think you belong, they do not always clap. Sometimes they conspire. 1 week after the debate victory, I received a thick white envelope in the mail. It had no return address, just my name. Neatly printed. Inside was a letter stamped with the official seal of the National Supreme Court Debate Invitational. My hands trembled. I unfolded the letter and read, "Congratulations. You have been selected as a special wildcard finalist to represent Georgia in the upcoming National Supreme Court debate in Washington, D.C. My heart stopped. It was not a dream. This was real. A national stage. A room full of the brightest students in the country. Law professors, judges, even retired justices as guest evaluators. I stared at the letter like it held sunlight. "Grandma," I shouted, running into the kitchen. She dropped her wooden spoon into the pot and turned. Wide-eyed, "We are going to D.C," I said. At first, she just stared. Then her knees buckled, and she sat down. And cried. Not the quiet kind. The kind that comes when life finally bends in your direction. That night, we danced, right there in our tiny living room, to a dusty record of Sam Cooke's "A Change Is Gonna Come." Our walls had never held that much joy, but joy has a way of attracting shadows. The very next morning, I was called into the principal's office. Principal Kingsley was a tall, sharp man with hair so neat it looked painted on. He had cold eyes and a colder handshake. Sitting beside him, arms crossed, lips pressed, was M's. "Wallace. Elijah," he said, steepling his fingers. "We have received some concerning feedback." I sat down slowly as Wallace slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printed screenshots of my debate quotes, photos, articles, circles drawn in red pen, annotations. "She believes your speech was too political," he said. I blinked. It was a debate about the Constitution. "Yes, but the school district is worried. Your speech referenced systemic bias, inequality. Some parents felt it portrayed the school in a negative light." I almost laughed. The school that rejected me. Tone. Elijah, as Wallace cut in sharply. We are trying to help you. Help me, I said. Voice tightening. By doing what? Principal Kingsley cleared his throat. We are asking that you decline the doxy invitation, or at least agree not to mention Booker T. Washington High in any of your speeches. This school is not prepared for national attention. I looked at both of them, as Wallace flushed with barely hidden resentment, and Principal Kingsley masking his discomfort under Fox's concern. Is that a threat? I asked. No. He said, it is a request. For the sake of harmony, I stood up slowly, folded the letter, slid the folder back. Then here's my reply. They waited. I looked Principal Kingsley square in the eye and said, no. His jaw clenched, as Wallace's eyes narrowed. I earned that stage, I said, and when I speak, I will tell the truth, even if it burns. Then I walked out, but the fight had only just begun. Later that day, I found out my registration for the doxy event had been quietly blocked from processing. Someone from the district had forgotten to submit the paperwork. Donald Ray heard about it first. He met me at the library that evening. Fuming. They think you will just roll over. He said, that you will go back to silence. I won tea. I whispered. He smiled. Good, because I made a call. That night, we drafted an official complaint to the State Board of Education, complete with audio recordings, written notes, and timeline documentation of everything from the days Wallace first humiliated me. Grandma stayed up with us, brewing coffee and muttering prayers. And the next morning, it happened. The twist. The news caught fire. Black teen claims school tried to sabotage national debate invitation. Local hero or problem student. Atlanta student challenges district in free speech battle. They tried to spin it, paint me as angry, as ungrateful. But something else happened too. A groundswell. Students I would never spoken to started standing with me. Teachers who had stayed silent began whispering support. Someone slipped a note in my locker. They tried to do this to my brother too. Keep fighting. Then one day, I got a phone call. A deep, calm voice on the line said, Elijah Brown. Yes, this is Justice Samuel Harris. I am one of the keynote judges for the doxy debate. I have read your speech, and I want you on that stage. I could not breathe. You will speak, he said, even if I have to escort you myself. That call changed everything. 2 days later, the district backed down. My registration was reinstated as Wallace, suspended under investigation for misconduct. Principal Kingsley, placed on temporary leave. I had won again, but it did not feel like revenge. It felt like justice. And the best part, it was not just for me anymore. I had cracked something open, and the whole city was watching. I had never been on an airplane before. The morning of the flight, my grandma woke me up at 4:30 a.m. Not because we were late, but because she said, a boy should never rush into a moment this big. Let the Lord walk ahead of you. She had pressed my shirt herself twice. Her hands shook while pinning a little gold cross to my collar. Whispering, "You are not just going to speak. You are going to testify." The airport was chaos. Lights, sounds, people rushing in all directions. But for me, it felt like walking through a dream. My backpack was packed with nothing but my speech, a folder of case law, and a single photo of my mom in her graduation robe. The moment we boarded the plane, Grandma squeezed my hand and looked out the window. "Your mama's up there," she said, "watching you fly." Washington, D.C. was colder than I expected, but the welcome was warm. News crews were already waiting at the terminal. Someone shouted my name. Flashbulbs burst. Reporters with badges waved microphones. "Elijah, do you believe you were targeted by your school? Elijah, what does this debate mean to you? Elijah, how does it feel to be a symbol for students nationwide?" Symbol, that word again. I was not trying to be a symbol. I was just a boy who refused to be silenced. The next morning, I stood outside the Capitol building, looking up at the marble dome glowing in the sunrise. Inside, in the old courtroom where the National Supreme Court debate was held, banners hung overhead. The seating resembled a Senate hearing. Semicircular rows. Elevated podiums. Microphones. Judges seated high behind oak benches, robes draped over their laps. The topic this year: should judicial appointments be lifetime positions? I would spend weeks preparing for it, but nothing could prepare me for who walked in before the round began. Justice Samuel Harris, retired Supreme Court Justice. One of the most respected legal minds in the nation. He walked directly to my seat, leaned down, and whispered, "They will expect you to argue. Surprise them by listening first." Then he smiled. "Make it unforgettable, one by one." Students from across the country were called. From Massachusetts, from California, from Connecticut. They wore suits. They carried portfolios. Some had personal coaches whispering last-minute notes. And then, Elijah Brown, representing Georgia. I rose, not in a suit, just in my best shirt, pressed trousers, and grandma's cross glinting softly under the lights. I stepped forward to the podium. The murmurs died. Cameras clicked. I did not look at them. I looked at the judges, looked at my notes, then closed the folder, and I began. When a bench becomes a throne, democracy becomes a memory. The first sentence cut through the room like a blade. I spoke slowly, carefully, not shouting, not rushing. I told them about balance of power, about historical abuses, about the founders' intentions. I quoted Hamilton, Madison, even dissenting opinions from landmark cases. But then I changed gears. I looked up. When a black teenager from Atlanta needs a national stage just to be heard. What does that say about the court of public opinion? The room went silent. I did not blink. Laws protect, but justice listens. And when our systems silence certain voices before they speak, No term length can make up for that loss. I paused, breathed, then finished. Some people are afraid of what young people might say when we speak, but you should be more afraid of what happens if we do not. I stepped down. The judges said nothing, but Justice Harris. He stood and clapped. Then one by one, the rest followed, even the other students. It was not just applause. It was acknowledgement. I had come as the outsider, the rejected. Now I stood at the center. That night, headlines blazed across the internet. From silence to spotlight, Elijah Brown's speech moves national judges to tears. Student who was told to sit down stands tall in Washington. Black teen from Atlanta delivers the most powerful speech of the year. Back home, students at Booker T. Washington High watched from the projector in the gym. Even Mims Wallace, suspended at home, could not escape it. She saw me. Everyone did, and when I returned, the airport was no longer a blur. It was a triumph. Grandma wore her best hat. The choir from our local church came to sing. Neighbors clapped. Even the mayor came to shake my hand. But the best moment came in the school hallway. Trent Kingsley stood by his locker. He did not smirk this time. He stepped aside as I passed. Then, quietly, said, "You were right." I turned. "About what?" "You belonged up there." I nodded, not in pride, in peace, because I had not just won a debate. I would change the debate altogether. There is something no one tells you about winning. It does not make you untouchable. It makes you a target. After the national debate, I returned to Booker T. Washington High as a changed person, but not everyone was ready for that change. The district tried to paint my victory as a tool. They issued a newsletter calling me a bright example of the excellence we cultivate. Even though they had tried to stop me at every turn, my face was printed next to Principal Kingsley C., even though he was still on leave, under investigation for unethical conduct. It felt fake, like they were clapping for a version of me that fit their comfort, not my truth. But I did not come back to pose for photos. I came back for war. Because something else had happened while I was gone. Donald Ray had been fired. No explanation. Just a quiet removal of his library privileges and a security escort out of the public building. I found out from a librarian named Ms. Ellis. She passed me a note under a stack of books. District called him a disruptive influence. He asked too many questions. I felt the air leave my lungs. The man who had believed in me when no one else did. The man who gave me the tools. The fire. The language I owed everything to him. And they discarded him like garbage. That afternoon, I stood at the front steps of my school, holding a megaphone. A small group of students stood with me quiet at first. That freshman boy with braces. The girl from speech class who had always doodled in her notebook. Even a few from the debate team, including Samantha Bloom. I held the mic. My voice did not shake. They silenced him because he taught us how to speak. They removed him because he told us we mattered. That ends today. We marched peacefully down the hallways, out through the courtyard, onto the district steps, and the media followed. By nightfall, we were trending again. #Justice Foray. #Letalija Speak. #Fire Wallace. And for the first time, the system cracked from the inside. Board members resigned. An emergency meeting was called. I was invited to speak this time, not as a student, but as a witness. At the hearing, I sat in a chair before the panel. Cameras rolled. Parents watched from the back. And Ms. Wallace, yes, her sat across from me, lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. The moderator asked gently, "Elijah, do you have anything to say before the final vote?" I stood, and I did not read from a script. I did not raise my voice. I just spoke. When I was told to sit down, I did not just hear rejection. I heard generations of silence. I heard every student who never got called on. Every parent who never got a parent-teacher meeting because they looked too tired. Every teacher who tried to help but got punished for it. I turned to Ms. Wallace. You did not fail me. You exposed the system that created you, and I forgive you. But this school cannot move forward while carrying the weight of what you have done. She said nothing. Tears filled her eyes, but she did not deny it. Because truth, when spoken with grace, does not need a shout. It just needs courage. The board voted as Wallace terminated. Donald Ray reinstated and promoted to Director of Student Engagement. Principal Kingsley formally removed. Cheers erupted, but I did not smile. Not yet, because I had one more thing to do. That Sunday, I walked onto the stage at New Light Baptist Church, the same church where my mom had once sung in the choir before sickness stole her voice. I was the guest speaker. The congregation, black, old, young, dressed in their best, stood and clapped as I approached the pulpit. And I spoke to them, not about pain, about power. Our voices are not curses, they are keys. And when we use them with love, not spite, with facts, not fists, we do not just win debates, we change futures. My grandma sat in the front row, her hands clasped. Silent tears fell from her cheeks. Behind her, the whole city had come alive, and inside me, I felt it. Victory, not over people but over silence. The final battle had never been with Ms. Wallace. It had been with fear, and I had won. The last time I saw Ms. Wallace, she was not standing in front of a blackboard or sitting with her arms crossed behind a desk. She was seated alone, in a folding chair outside the district office, her hands trembling. Her hair no longer tied back with military precision. Her face looked smaller, like the weight of her own silence had collapsed inward. She did not see me, or maybe she did, and simply looked away. Either way, it did not matter, because the mighty had already fallen, and for once, it was not a victory built on revenge, it was built on truth. After the board's decision, the whole city began to feel different. The local paper ran a headline the next morning that said everything. Voice of a generation, Elijah Brown forces school district reckoning. I did not smile when I saw it, because I was not done yet. We launched a student-led coalition that week. Samantha Bloom. Marcus Tran, the freshman with braces whose name I finally learned was Kyle. We called ourselves the Echo Initiative because we were not just about speaking up. We were about making sure our words rippled. We collected stories from students across the city, recordings of discrimination, of academic neglect, of teachers who were tired, unheard, or quietly heroic. We did not just demand change. We documented the need for it. And that was the difference. They could not silence facts, not when we gave them a microphone. We published a report, a real one formatted, cited, printed and presented before the State Council on Education Equity. It shocked them. Not just for the content, but for who presented it. A 16-year-old boy who had once been told to sit down for raising his hand. I will never forget the look on their faces when I said, "I do not want your sympathy. I want your systems to work." The speech went viral. News crews started camping outside our school. Students from other states sent letters, some handwritten, telling me I had given them the courage to speak. One said, "I used to think no one like me would ever matter in courtrooms or Congress. But you made me believe again." But nothing hit me harder than a package that arrived one Friday morning. No sender, just a simple envelope marked in gold. United States Supreme Court Office of Retired Justices. Inside was a handwritten note. "Elijah, I have argued before 9 justices in my life. I have never seen anyone speak with more clarity, grace, and conviction than you did on that stage. When I stepped down from the bench, I feared the next generation would be too angry, too cynical, too detached. You proved me wrong. Keep arguing. Keep believing. We need you more than ever." Samuel Harris, retired Justice of the United States Supreme Court. I sat in silence for nearly 10 minutes. Grandma had to sit beside me, just holding my hand. I finally whispered. "He said we need me." She smiled gently. "Baby, I have always known the world did. They are just catching up." Meanwhile, as Wallace's name was scrubbed from the district's faculty pages, a formal letter of apology was sent to my home from the superintendent. But I did not want an apology. I wanted transformation. And slowly, it came. New teachers were hired, ones who looked like us, spoke like us, listened like we mattered. The hallway murals changed, not just founding fathers in powdered wigs, but Martin, Rosa, James Baldwin, Sonia Sotomayor, even Thurgood Marshall himself. A new debate room was built, and the name engraved above the door, Elijah Brown Center for Constitutional Speech and Debate. At the ribbon cutting, I did not speak much. I just stood there, beside my grandma who wore her fanciest dress, a blue feathered hat, and the biggest grin in Atlanta, and let others have the mic. Students. Quiet ones. Loud ones. A girl with a stutter. A boy with a limp. They all spoke. They owned that stage. And I realized the real fall of the oppressors was not just when a teacher got fired or a principal got demoted. It was when the ones they tried to silence spoke louder than fear ever could. It was when the ignored became unstoppable. It was when I stopped being the only voice in the room. And suddenly, the room was full of voices. The air smelled different that morning. fresher, brighter, almost holy. It was not the weather, it was something deeper. Something I felt in my bones the moment I stepped into the school auditorium that now bore my name, the Elijah Brown Center for Constitutional Speech and Debate, a place that did not exist a year ago, a place I had once believed could never exist for someone like me. And now, I was walking through its glass doors, dressed in the same shirt I wore at the national debate, still neatly pressed, still bearing Grandma's gold cross at the collar. Only this time, I was not here to prove anything. I was here to pass the mic. The auditorium was packed, every seat filled. Students from across the state had come. Teachers, parents, district officials, even reporters, though this time they sat quietly, respectfully. On stage, behind the podium, I unfolded the final speech I would ever give at this school. I looked into the crowd and saw her grandma sitting in the front row, wearing her brightest yellow dress. Her fingers clutched a tissue. Though she had not cried yet, she was saving those tears for the ending. She said. Behind her stood Donald Ray, now Director of Student Engagement, beaming like a proud uncle, and beside him, Kyle, the shy freshman who once whispered, "I want to learn," now standing tall, now about to compete in his first national debate, now full of a fire that once lived in me. I took a breath, closed my eyes, and began. I used to be a boy no one heard, a boy who sat in the back, who raised his hand and was told, "Sit down," who learned early that silence was easier than shame. But silence did not save me. Words did. Not just the ones I spoke, but the ones that came from people who believed in me when I did not believe in myself. A librarian who handed me a book. A grandmother who never stopped saying, "Your voice matters." A city that refused to let one flame die. And to the people who told me I did not belong, thank you. Because every time you tried to close the door, I learned how to build a new one. Every time you told me to be quiet, you taught me how to speak louder without raising my voice. You gave me something no textbook ever could. Purpose. I do not stand here today to celebrate me. I stand here for every student who ever sat in the back. For every kid who thought they will never choose someone like me. For every voice that was buried under shame, under fear, under centuries of systems designed to ignore us. I want you to know, you were never too quiet. They were just too afraid to listen. But the time for fear is over, because we are not asking for microphones anymore. We are building stages. We are not waiting to be invited. We are creating space. We are not whispering for change. We are the change. And let this place, this auditorium, this school, this city stand as proof. That truth, when spoken with courage, does not just echo. It ignites. The room exploded. Applause. Cheering. Tears. Grandma stood slowly, wiping her cheeks. Ray hugged me backstage and whispered, "I told you. Fire, son. Fire with direction." And Kyle, he walked up, trembling, clutching his own speech folder. "I do not think I can do this," he said. I placed a hand on his shoulder, looked him square in the eyes. "Yes, you can, because the stage does not belong to the loudest. It belongs to the ready." He nodded and walked out into his own moment. That afternoon, I packed my books one last time. Not because I was running, but because I was rising. In the fall, I would begin at Howard University. Full scholarship, pre-law track. The very school Thurgood Marshall once walked through. I visited his statue the first day I stepped onto campus. I placed my hand on the bronze plaque and whispered, "I am here because you were." 3 months later, a letter arrived in our mailbox. Grandma called me with a voice too shaky to contain the news. It read, "Ma. Elijah Brown, in recognition of your unwavering advocacy, courageous testimony, and profound impact on educational equity, the President of the United States would like to formally invite you to speak at the White House Education Reform Summit this November. Respectfully, Office of the Secretary of Education." I held the letter for a long time. Then I called Grandma back and said the only thing I could. "Tell the church to start ironing their best robes. We are going to D.C. again." And now, to you reading this, if you have ever been told to sit down, if someone has tried to clip your voice before it could fly, if you have ever felt too poor, too different, too quiet, too invisible to matter, let me say what no one said to me early enough. You do matter. Your words are a weapon and a wing. Your silence is not your destiny. And your truth can light fires that burn down empires built on injustice. So speak. Even if your voice shakes, even if no one listens at first, speak. Because the world only changes when the unheard begin to echo. And when your echo rises, I promise, the world will listen. Elijah Brown started as a quiet boy no one believed in. A boy told to sit down, told he was not good enough, told his voice did not belong. But through resilience, truth, and the power of words, Elijah did not just win a debate, he changed a broken system. He stood up, even when everyone told him to sit down. He fought back, not with fists, but with facts. And in doing so, he lit a path for every unheard student to follow. From the back row of a classroom to the stage of the White House, Elijah proved that one voice grounded in truth can shake a nation. Never let anyone define your worth based on where you are from. The color of your skin, or how loud you are, silence may be comfortable, but speaking up, even when your voice shakes, is what changes the world. Justice does not begin in courtrooms. It begins in classrooms, and in the courage to stand up when you are told to sit down. Your voice matters. If this story moved you, if Elijah's journey reminded you of someone you know, or someone you once were, do not scroll away. Subscribe for more powerful stories like this that uplift the unheard. Comment below. Have you ever been told to stay silent? What did you do? Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters. Let us build a community where no voice is left behind, because truth deserves to echo, and you deserve to be heard.